we're now going into a forest corridor. Really excited to take you back to this new area that we're cohabitating right now, or at least preparing to. It's the Milpa. It's the beginning of the food forest. We're moving through the succession of this analog forest that we're trying to create because the ocean's drastically rising here. Like when I first came here in 2001, we had easy 30 meters of beach. And so, now you saw it when you pulled up, like the beach never really gets any bigger than that. And so the realities are that, we're going to lose land. And if you walk down the beach, you see massive trees and all kinds of things, and you get to observe their roots, which is cool, to see how they hold on. Specifically, noni has been really interesting to observe, like its process of like washing away and its root systems. But these big canopy trees, they don't have root systems like that, which is really quite amazing when you think about trees. And you think about trees that are in other climates, like often they will have like almost a mirror image of their root system below the ground. But here in the tropics, and what makes us so strong, but also makes us so delicate to the change and a little fragile with the climate change that's going to happen, is that we don't weather many seasons, and so the extremes are like extremely extreme for us when they can happen. And the trees have adapted so perfectly to the amount of water that we have here and the amount of sunlight and everything into the soil conditions. Because of the amount of water, like you can see if you look at this cut, that's like mud. Like there's not much of like a humus layer, and the horizons of the forest, it's like we have the humus, we have all the stuff that's decomposing on the top, full of the microbiome, the little critters, the little like macrofauna, macroflora that's in there, and then they start to penetrate down into the soil, and you'll get, soil, which is mineral, mixed with the organic material. Soil's 45% mineral. And so like if we're looking at this clay here, it's mostly mineral. There's very little organic material in there, and the plants want that organic material because that's a part of their primary metabolites, like carbons and sugars and those kinds of things that they like retake back up. That they also participate in manufacturing sugars from the sun, which is just incredible in this relationship with mycelium. And so, in some ecosystems that's really super deep. Like in places like valleys, like the Hunza Valley or something in Pakistan, or like even the breadbasket of the United States once was this. And it had like 18, 20, so many feet of topsoil. But here in the tropics, it's like inches because of the amount of water. And so all of the biomass is in the canopy. And because of it being in the canopy like that, that's why it's called the rainforest, because the plants are like participating so strongly in the hydrological cycle, just like breathing in and transforming the water throughout their bodies and breathing it back out. You'll see clouds forming over the rainforest, and this is why deforestation causes drought, not just because the trees are holding the soil, but also because they're breathing and exchanging with the atmosphere. It's like our biosphere isn't just like this part here, it's like everything. It goes all the way up into our what we call our atmosphere, has this constant exchange. And so these plants, these trees in particular, like they don't hold because they're reaching so high for the sky. What they create for themselves are these buttresses. And so these buttresses, we call them that because, when like Marco Polo and stuff came back and drawings of Asia and really seeing for the first time, the European culture saw rainforest trees for the first time, is how they started to develop like the ideas for how they could reach really high to the sky, like and talk to God, like in their Gothic cathedrals and everything. They have the flying buttresses which would hold them, but it's because they're inspired by the trees. And the trees also are like the axis mundi, they're the pillar between heaven and earth, and they mirror each other perfectly. And so they're this like torus, they're this like constant self-feeding organism that's like living and breathing and interacts with so much life around it. And so because of these buttresses, though, that's what holds up this heavy, heavy canopy. And like when these trees fall, there will be barely a depression in the earth. They're like a meter maybe, and like all of these of any kind of a taproot, because they're getting all their water from up here. They're not pulling water from the ground. You can see how old this tree is because of these lianas. And so we have vines and we have lianas. And lianas are the ones that are planted at the top and then send their roots down to the earth. And look at how woody that is. You can almost see it starting See how they're sending these vines down? Isn't that beautiful? And so then these will hit the earth and they're going to start taking their nutrients in from the soil, transporting it back up. The vines and the lianas are some of the oldest species in the forest because they're the ones, because the trees don't hold the soil super, super tight. They can get very heavy and eventually like pull the tree down. And so they're kind of like Saturn in the ecosystem. They're like the destroyer. They're the one that like breaks everything down for like the succession to open back up and start all over again. And that's like what Saturn does. Like in astrology, in our charts, when Saturn comes around, it's like break you down to your essential parts so you can reconstruct yourself back up. That was original. I just thought of that. So you can see we're not going to make a chinampa, but what we're doing is just helping the water to move into the chinampas. We've been cleaning up this beautiful rainforest trail. When I say cleaning up, we're kind of chopping a little bit of the understory so we could walk through it nice and see just like the most spectacular trees. Look, these are our native bees up here, the mariolas. Aren't they beautiful? They're stingless. They make this really delicate, like champagne-colored honey that you can put in your eyes for cataracts and infections. They're super sweet, and if you sing to them, they'll like hang around you, or tell them stories, they'll hang around. And you can establish them really easy at your like homestead, which is like a piece of bamboo or a box or like a hole in your wood in your house. They'll come right in. So these are old trees from the original Afro-Caribbean community, and they have monilia. And so monilia is a yeast that started to affect the cacao trees really, really negatively in like the 50s, 60s, 70s. And it drove a lot of the Afro-Caribbean and the indigenous people who had their livelihood around cacao because, you know, like we see cacao as a commodity, you know, it's bought and sold and traded, but also sacred medicine, you know, it's like this such an interesting like thing that can happen to these plants that like affect us so deeply, how we just start to pervert them by making them commodities. I just wrote about that today, actually, about the commodification of plants. It's 420, happy 420, and like what we've done to cannabis, you know, which is also a sacrament medicine, just like cacao's sacrament. But you know, the people they used it like it was their currency, and sold or traded goods for it, sold goods for it. You know, the Aztecs, when they would conquer, would take tribute in cacao, and so it's always had like a value system around it. And so the monilia, you know, there's all kinds of like conspiracy theory that it was planted by possibly like banana plantations and stuff like that because it doesn't really spread anymore. Like it hit really hard, and there's a lot of cacao now is done by a bud graft. Like there's specific varieties of cacao that are monilia resistant, but when it came through, it was like, and it like drove all these people into the plantations for having to work and their livelihood and stuff. So you can take that for what it is. So this is the future of Punta Mona. The majority of our human settlement has been much closer to the coast. Right now we're probably like, what do you think, like 200, 300 meters maybe off the coast? 400? Yeah. Yeah, so we're in a much safer place right now. If anything does happen, you know, with the ocean. Right now, like the majority of the houses are up there. But that's because that's where everyone was housed, so it was really kind of cool, like when you live in certain places, that are possibly a little less developed in their rules and regulations, is that you can ask for forgiveness instead of for permission, which is fun, you know, when you're like trying to build things or do things sometimes. And so the house, like the main house where you guys came into, like where we were talking and everything this morning, that was a house that was there for a while. It's in a book called Shelter. You can see it. And it was this old, like rickety, breaking down house. And couldn't build a new house because we were, so we built around it and then removed it. So, you know, like things have always been on the beach, and that's where we decided to live, was on the beach, and Patty's house was out on the beach. And when he was a child, so Patty was the last person in this community. He died in 2013. And he, you know, really with his passing was like the loss of a culture in so many ways. Like kids, they don't really speak patois. They don't know like the gardens, and the heritage foods that were here and everything. But he said when he was growing up, on low tide, you could walk to the island. Think about that. I mean, you'd have like, some water. It wasn't like sand, but you could walk to the island. And so like, the coasts are drastically changing, Earth's changing. And when we think of our human settlements, like what are we going to do? We can't push back against nature. It's impossible. We can in some ways, with like dams on the big scale, we're blowing up mountain tops, like this stupid shit that we're doing, or we can do things like this that are in harmony with the land. So really in considering, like what are we going to do with this farm and with this project is we're going to move inland. So there's some trees that did come down as a permaculture, so you do have to be okay with cutting some secondary growth trees. We're not cutting primary trees, but we're cutting some of these trees that are in to heal the land. They're in here to create, the perfect succession, the perfect kind of ecosystem for other, native plants to come in. So we did take down a few. You can see them, they're getting populated with mushrooms. Ideally, we'd biochar all of this like crazy, but we just don't really have the infrastructure right now to be making a ton of biochar, personnel or the steel drums. So they're here, they're down, releasing carbon into the atmosphere, but also putting carbon back into the soil. And then we've planted this area. So this is the Milpa. And the Milpa here, we're going to have Yuca, also called manioc or cassava. We did rows, you can kind of see them, rows of coconuts. And so we have like the pipas, like the drinking coconuts. We also have over here, you can see too, eat coconuts like cut open and cook, like to eat, intermixed with the yucca. The yucca's gonna live a few years, all kinds of fruit trees. We put in some like adapted avocados. We put in, what else is in here? Oh my God, Stephen was giving me this whole, yeah, but the okra will only be around for like a minute. The okra is just pretty much there, like to maximize the space. I can't remember all of the fruit trees that are planted in here, but he ordered like 300 fruit trees. And so and you're going to see when we get to the top of the hill here how extensive this food forest is going to be. And so this is the first succession. And so when you think of the succession of the forest, if this was cow pasture, the first things that would come in, be like your weedy plants, like all of these little guys, these little like runners, these plants only live like a year. They just like flower, make seed, drop, live, die, bring carbon to the soil. And then like out of that, we'd get like shrubby plants that are going to bring in and make habitat for different wildlife, like the early successions like lizards and little rodents and those kinds of things. And then the second succession, you're going to get birds and maybe some, bigger rodents and possibly some little predators. Like if you're in a different ecosystem, maybe like fox, would start to come in at this time because they'd have food and some shelter to like run under. And then the trees start to take over, and those are like the fruit trees, and so like we're mimicking that by planting the yucca and planting the okra and planting the pineapples, and these plants that are again only going to live like a few years, creating habitat for the trees, the big nut trees, or like this giant meringue that we have on the top of the hill right there. We have some bidiba in the kitchen. I think we have a champadak in the kitchen we can eat too. Yeah, there's like taro planted in here, and then as we go up the hill, you're gonna see yucca everywhere. So, when you think about like, what are the foods that are feeding our planet right now are grasses, pretty much. It's corn, it's rye, it's wheat, it's rice. Those are all in the Poaceae family, and so they're grasses. And like grasses, what do grasses do? Imagine your yard, just like on the macro scale. They choke out everything else. It's like, yeah, you're gonna get some weeds and stuff. When the grasses take over, especially these genetic species that we've been like making to be so hardcore and so hard to get rid of, like they just run. And so you think about the yard, or like what is that gross bluegrass, or the different like grasses that people put in their yards. It's like, imagine that, but over millions and millions of acres, And so, but we're addicted to the carb. It's like we need sugars, actually. It's like it's a primary metabolite. It's something that we need to give ourselves energy. And so, with perennial diet and thinking of food forests and the succession of forests, things like yucca or yam pea or breadfruit, really looking at our nuts, like our chestnuts and our almonds and our pistachios and bread nuts and so many nuts that are, native to different bioregions. We need to be switching our mentality over to those as being our starches and our sources of sugars, not the grasses. So that's where Yuca is really great because, it's this plant, it's going to hold, if you planted too much yucca, if this was a plantation of yucca, it would, because it's a root, it would start to degrade the soil. But if it's in, a healthy rotation and, they're going to be full of minerals, it's an easy carb to digest, it's not a grass family carb, and it's a medicinal plant as well. It's a Euphorb family, Euphorbaceae. You can use the leaves, you can steam them, you have to cook them because they would burn your mouth really bad, a little toxic. A lot of the plants in that family are kind of toxic. Chaya, we have dragon's blood, Euphorb. There's a bunch of really cool Euphorbaceae cactuses, which I'm just blown away on how those even evolved. I'd like to know more about that. So it's a pot herb as well. It's you can cook the greens, you can eat the root. Medicinal plant, if you're going to grate up the roots, or used for cystic breasts. So here we are. This is what's called the Milpa. The Milpa in Spanish is essentially the three sisters that maybe some people watching this would be familiar with, from the north. Here in Costa Rica, it would be corn, it would be your yuca, it would be your hot peppers and your bananas. You could put other things in here, different kinds of beans, squash, those kinds of things. And so what we're doing, and nitrogen fixers everywhere. And so what we're doing here is this is a part of the succession of the food forest. So it's an open area. It's very, there weren't trees that need to be cut down. This was full of vines. It was full of this grass called Caña Brava, which is a really sharp grass that we use in construction for walls and stuff like that. It's really pretty and it lasts a long time. It's also very sharp. And so working with the chinampas, you can see there's the canals and there's a few ponds in a few different places. So, as we're planting these plants that are, 1 year an annual or a biannual or a triannual, and they're creating this biomass for the ground and this food for us and this habitat for the trees to grow up, fruit trees. This one's already pretty established. This is a Garcinia relative. I'm not sure which one it is in particular, but that's a mangosteen relative. And eventually this tree's going to get quite big and shade out this area. And that's going to happen with a lot of the other trees around here. So this will eventually become food forest. We will be able to grow some food in between. We're doing probably squash and cucumbers, maybe hot peppers in between those, things like papayas and the bananas, which are shorter lived. The bananas are a plant, they're not a tree, and they only have one life cycle. So as the banana grows, when it's ready, you cut it down. But they produce so much biomass, they produce so many babies, hijos you call them, because they don't make seed. And so you propagate them from the little shoots that come up around the bottom of them. They're really useful in the tropical permaculture system. This is our water catchment system, our primary catchment. You should, have at least 3 inputs of water. That's our permaculture kind of base minimum. So, we have a big system, then we have various other roof catchments and 4 different wells here on this property. This roof has been built a long time ago. It's probably about 15 years old, 12 maybe. Your water catchment systems are really super simple. Effectively, what you need is a roof, surface area to catch water. It could even be a giant piece of plastic or a tarp. Like my friend Ashton, who is homesteading his property up in the Arnall area, what he does is when he needs water, because it's Arnall and they have a lot of rain, is he just hurls some cinder blocks over a thing, puts up his plastic, and collects 55 gallons of water. Super simple. So we've got this roof, big surface area. When you go around it, there are some gutters. The gutters go first into these buckets, which have coral in them and different rocks. They're going to get a first, a rock filter for it, and then they're going to go into our bigger tanks, which are partially submerged. Some are fully submerged underground. We can hold about 5,000 gallons of water at a time, of rainwater. Here in the southern Caribbean of Costa Rica, we get about 3.5 meters of rain a year, and so I'm 5'7". It's about 3 of me almost. No. It's 2.5 of me, about that rain a year. When we think about global rainfall and everything, I think we get 113,000 cubic centimeters, but that's not, equally distributed. Of course, we're in the rainforest here, and so we get a ton of rain, where some people get this much rain a year. So it's so interesting, like when we work with water, because water is the medium for life. It's like we came out of the primal oceans, and then, as we need water, we're very watery beings, we're this blue planet, but at the same time, water is also a vector for disease. Like we can grow bacterias, we can grow mosquitoes and all kinds of things in water that can be quite harmful, not just to, the possible ecosystems, but also to human beings. And human beings as a part of this world, we want to thrive and be vital and happy and healthy. And so, when we're working with the swamp and thinking about collecting water and retaining the water and slowly getting it back out into the ocean and making sure that we're replanting, so it's participating in the hydrological cycle, we're constantly like having to think about our water input and output. And so often it's like you turn on your tap, you turn on your shower, you flush your toilet, and like, where does it go? Like, where does the poop go when you flush in the toilets? Like, how many people really know? Or when you turn on the tap, where is it coming from? And then where does it go again? And it's like, this other kind of human-created hydrological cycle in so many ways, but it's broken because it doesn't allow, in many, many big cities, like rain to fall back down to the earth to regenerate, the water table and the aquifers and stuff. And so you look at somewhere like LA. I learned this statistic, I think, in the movie Inhabit, which is the permaculture, Inhabit, a permaculture perspective. It's this awesome movie about permaculture and solutions. So much better than Before the Flood. I mean, Before the Flood's amazing. It's like Leonardo DiCaprio and Trent Reznor and like all this amazing soundtrack and video footage, and you leave like feeling terrible watching it, like we're all going to shit. And then you watch Inhabit and you're like, yes, this is how humans participate in life, and make life beautiful and what it is. And so, like when we're working, like with our systems and like, oh, I know where I was going with that. So LA, this statistic I learned from Inhabit is that in LA, they get a third of their water falls in rain a year. But it all gets washed away into the ocean because of the massive urban suburban sprawl and the inability of the water to penetrate back down into the ground. And so instead, they're pumping water in from like Wyoming and dried up the Colorado River, like all this like really stupid stuff, and then cycling that water back around. Once it hits the city, it goes through municipal treatment systems and back out. And what's in the municipal treatment systems are chemicals, are like estrogens. You look at why people are so crazy in the United States. I think a lot of it's because our water is just so unvital, not non-vital, dead water, that's full of pharmaceuticals and industrial waste, really. And it's like we've taken this like the medium for life and have just like perverted it so harshly that it's made us crazy. It's like you literally look at like rates of suicide, you look at rates of like domestic violence, rates of psychosis, rates of like depression, and all the different kinds of issues that people are having with their physical bodies and their hormone levels and all that. It's I think so much of it goes back to how we're treating our waters.